Hello, this is a short video on how to set up a development environment with Visual Studio Code for JavaScript. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the Arcgis JavaScript API and using Node.js and TypeScript in order to enable IntelliSense or code hint or code completion, whatever you want to call it. And so if that's what you're trying to do in general, even with other kinds of JavaScript libraries or TS TypeScript file libraries, this may be the video for you if you're looking for an idiot to explain it to you like you're 5, because that's kind of the video I was looking for whenever I was learning this. So hopefully this helps you in some way. So to get started, we're going to need Node.js, and I just downloaded the most current version and Visual Studio Code. I've already downloaded and installed those. They're pretty straightforward installs, and so we should be pretty good to go with those installs like that, just straight in. And so we're going to start out by just creating a project folder. We're going to add a workspace folder. I like to work with things on the desktop so they're easy to get to until everything gets cluttered, but whatever, to each their own. And we're going to add that. Okay, so this gives us a welcome tab. We're just going to close this, and then we're going to launch a terminal, new terminal. And you'll notice this launches a PowerShell terminal right here in our project folder that we just created and opened. And because we've already installed Node.js, what that allows us to do and what Node.js is basically a it's kind of like, well, it's a compiler we can run on our workspace or on our server. And we can run JavaScript files just as we would PHP or Python, just some kind of local scripting. And so now we can use JavaScript like that. We don't have to simply just use it in our web browsers. But with that, we can now use something called TypeScript. And that's what we really need for IntelliSense. And so we're going to run this command, npm install -g TypeScript, and this will install the TypeScript package at the global scope. And we want to talk a little bit what TypeScript is, and as we're talking about IntelliSense and adding that functionality to a development environment, just think about the things that go into what make that possible. We have a language syntax, and then we also have things like classes and objects and types and structures, things that we know. We are expecting a string, or there is an available method, or there's a property that we can use. And that's nice whenever you're dealing with languages that are strongly typed, such as C++ or Java. But JavaScript is not strongly typed. It's very loosely typed. We just call variables vars or const, and we don't really know what they are. The compiler doesn't care until runtime, and so we don't get any kind of errors or feedback until runtime often. And we do know JavaScript has a syntax, so we can get that easily up front, but we really don't know anything about objects or properties or anything that we're trying to access there. So Microsoft steps up to be our hero with TypeScript, and a TypeScript definition file allows us to basically define JavaScript objects and properties and the things that we need in order for IntelliSense to work. And so having Node.js installed and then installing TypeScript on top of it allows us to do this. And so one other thing that Microsoft has done, and this wasn't always available, is they have a definitely typed library, and you can go to this this link here, microsoft.github.io/typesearch, and you can search for TypeScript files that are available. Dojo has one now. They didn't always have one that was definitely typed, but what we are focusing on this time is the Arcgis JavaScript API. If you click on this, it takes you to a link that tells you actually how to install it. npm, that's Node Package Manager, install. Both of these commands now do the same thing. The save used to tell it that you're going to add it to your dependencies for a project. The @types tells it that it's in the definitely typed repository, and we will see that it installs it in an @types folder within our project. Okay, so this goes on. We can get some tutorials and other things. We see that this is maintained, written up by Esri. So that's how we know we're getting the real deal, and so that's what we want to do. So we can install this on TypeScript, but one thing we want to do over here before we do this is we actually want to initialize our project so that we can store our dependencies. So that's as simple as typing init-y. This uses this is a call to nothing. That's an install call to nothing. What have I done wrong? Okay, you know what, this is a node call. So npm init-y. My bad. Okay, so now this creates a package.json file. This stores our project properties, and now we can go back to this command we saw. I'm going to just run this here. It's npm install -- save @types js-js-api, and this will install the latest version they have in their repository, which is 4.11. You notice here it's created a packaged it's created a dependency in our package.json file. Also, it's added this folder here, this node modules, and then we have our typings stored under this folder, and definitely typed typings get stored under this folder. I believe always, but most of the times for sure. And then of course we have our Arcgis library here and our .d.ts, and so that's a TypeScript file, but it's a definition file. And so with that in here, now used to, let me just say, Visual Studio Code, you used to have to install a TypeScript extension for this to work, and I believe then you had to configure it, but not anymore. TypeScript, being a Microsoft project, it only makes sense that it works natively in Visual Studio Code now. So what's nice is now we can create a file. Let's just call it test.ts. And in this file, we can start calling, so let's call import map view equals require. And the require may look familiar. It's a little bit different syntax in this case, but you notice we already have a listing of our Esri modules here. So we're just going to search for map view, and ta-da. So now we can go down here, var map view. Let's call it something else so we don't hit a collision in our definition. So map view equals new map view. I don't know if you caught that, but there was a little IntelliSense error on the alias, and now we also have properties. We can click on this and it will actually open up the Arcgis API reference sheet for map view class. So we get quick definitions there, but on top of that, we can start working with the properties, and just like that, and then we get we start to see our IntelliSense already at this level. So you may think, oh great, we're ready to go, but there's a couple of things we need to do. First, we need to override the default TypeScript config file. Without a ts config file, it will try to compile TS files, and so that's one thing TypeScript allows you to do. You can run a tsc command and just also to validate that we have TypeScript properly installed. We hit tsc-v and we'll see we have the version here, 345. Okay, so the TypeScript compiler by default does not compile to a modular output, which is what we need for this. There's other things that go into this if we want to define certain packages. Let's get rid of this guy. We don't need it right now. So not everybody that offers a type definition or a typings file resides in the Microsoft repository. It used to be that Dojo didn't, so whenever you installed it, it may not be in this at typings. It would still be under node modules, but it would be in a separate library. So tsconfig file, you can tell it which files to use in compiling. If you leave it blank, it will look at all the files under the at typings file along with the others in your subdirectories, but it may miss outside definitions. So tsconfig file, you can specify the files you want. You can also specify other configurations. So let's just go ahead and add a file here, and that file is called tsconfig.json. I believe that's standard, and that's a standard you should probably follow, even if it's not looking specifically for tsconfig file, which I believe it is. That's the standard you're going to find, so don't rock the boat. Okay, so common option I see is compile and save, set to true. It doesn't work out of the bag. You have to set that up as your default build and work through that. I'm not going to show you all that here, but just show you that that option is here. Compiler options, we're going to specify the JavaScript specification target, which is the okay. So if you're working with Esri, which is or Arcgis, which we are in this case, is that's library is Dojo backed, and Dojo, my understanding is they support ES5. ES6 is available, but ES5 is what they supported, at least the last time I saw any statement on it. So we're targeting ES5 here. For the module, we are working with modules whenever we work with the Esri JS API, and so we specify AMD. Now if you go to Microsoft's TypeScript page, you can figure out which of these is appropriate for you, Common JS or what, but for us it's going to be AMD. If you don't have that set correctly, it's going to come back to bite you for Esri specifically. Here we're going to specify a source map, and this is used in troubleshooting, debugging, allows advanced debugging. It basically maps your JavaScript back to your TS, so whenever you're debugging, you can tell what line in your TS file may have an error, is my understanding. I honestly haven't used it, so I can't really speak to its capabilities, but there it is. It will help us in demonstrating something in just a minute. So here we're going to specify some files. Like I said, this tsconfig file, by default, if you don't specify files, oh, don't make a liar of me here. We'll do this, and we can start to specify the string. But if we hover over this, it will tell us that if you don't include the files property, it's just going to include all files in the containing directory. and subdirectories. But if you do want to specify specific files to use during compilation, you can do that here. So we don't have any files yet, and we don't really have a directory set up yet, so let's do that real quick here. What I see kind of in most of the Hello World examples is something like source. Let's move this out of the node modules. Yes. Make sure. Okay, yep. And in the source, we're going to add another file called main.ts. So this is going to be our main TypeScript file. Okay, so in our tsconfig.json, we can specify we are going to use our source main.ts, and we are also going to use, because we're using this TypeScript definition file, we can specify this path. Now again, keep in mind, for our case, you could leave this files property completely off and it would do it, but if you wanted to specify your files, maybe you didn't want to compile them all, maybe you had a version you were targeting, this is where you would specify those files that you want to use at configuration or at compiling. It's really late and it's hard to talk. So, okay, so node modules at types js-js-api and index.d.ts. Okay, so those are our two TypeScript files. We're going to use a compile time. Okay, to keep this rolling, like all good tutorials and coders, we're going to just copy and paste some script in here. I've already shown you kind of the capabilities already of the autocomplete that's there. But without this tsconfig file, which we need to save, let's just save all here. Without this tsconfig file, it's going to not compile it properly because, first off, I don't think it will hit this AMD target, and I'll show you that. So here's our main TS file now, and this is just using an example. You don't need to copy this because it's not going to work for you. This is something I'm using on my work environment. But if you are familiar with the examples that we see, let's see here, not this. Let's pull up I had an example pulled up here. Okay, so if you're familiar with this, this is normally what your examples would look like. You'd have all your JavaScript in here. It doesn't really scale well, but what we're looking at is this right here. Okay, so in our TypeScript file, we're using import whatever our local class we want to, it's basically an alias, equals require, and then we pull in the single module, and then we do that for each module. And then instead of having this callback function, we just deal with our code directly underneath it. So just so you know, that's kind of how these map to the examples. So if you're calling the same version of Arcgis, no, I've tried to copy and paste out of another project, because technically you should be able to take this, everything that's in this callback function here, and copy and paste it into this section, and then make sure all your import statements line up. That's not going to work for everybody, because first off, your aliases need to match up with what you're calling it in here, and it may well if you make sure that your map view is called by your module name. But also you need to make sure your Arcgis version is correct, and you can look at that. If you go to your package.json file, you can see in your requirements what version you were calling. Okay, So it won't always directly map if you just try to copy an example and paste it in here. The callback function contents in here. It's not always going to work out. So make sure if you do that, your versions match. But let's go ahead and show you. So this caused me a lot of headache. You can use the TSC, which is the call to the TypeScript compiler, to call a TypeScript file directly. So let's or to compile one directly. So let's do this source-main.ts. You notice here, this is our source folder. It created a JS file, but if you notice, we called in our tsconfig file, we said we wanted a source map. Well, it's not there. Also, if you look at your JavaScript, if you see this, then this is trying to target, I believe it's trying to call straight up common JavaScript. So what happened? We wanted something different in our tsconfig file. The problem is whenever you call it this way, it uses the default config file. If you want to use a tsconfig file to override the default configuration for compiling, you need to do tsc-p dot whatever the path is to your tsconfig file, like this, and it will compile using this file. So now you notice define, require, we notice over here we have a main.js map file. So this has followed our configuration settings. So another way of doing that is using the terminal, run build task, and then selecting your tsconfig.json file. And it will execute that task. Whenever it's done, it will let you know. You can press any key to close, and you should be good to go. Okay, so the one thing we haven't done yet, now we have our modules pulled in, and basically what we've done here is we've written our own custom module. So how do we use this with HTML or HTML? How do we tie this into our project? Well, so let's come into our demo. Let's create a file index.html. Okay, again, I'm going to, instead of you watching me fat finger through this, just going to copy and paste. You're welcome. No, this again is kind of the same layout as what our examples would be. You'd see a lot of this just the same as you see in all of our examples we see on the Esri website. But so the one difference here is this section, and let me just show you. Okay, so I'm not a Dojo master, but I understand this well enough to explain what's happening here. First off, the Arcgis library is based on Dojo. So whenever you call this, I imagine their library is likewise referencing Dojo. So basically, whenever you're pulling this in, you're also getting a reference to the Dojo library. And what we do in this section here, this script section here, is we are overriding the Dojo config file. If you take this script and paste it after the reference here to the Arcgis library, it's not going to work, because after this, any config file after Dojo is loaded is ignored, according to Dojo's website. So what we're doing here is we are overriding the Dojo configuration. We're specifying dependencies. This tells Dojo, as soon as you are loaded, load this module. And so we're loading our custom module, which is main.ts, or compiled, it's the actually main.js. And so really, whenever you come down here, my understanding is that this is actually a Dojo module definition file. Okay, so we're telling it that our package, we have some packages here, and the package name is app, and this is the path. I know this looks like some complicated regex. I didn't figure this out. This is actually something that Dojo recommends on their websites and their tutorials. And then, of course, our path is source. But this helps to make sure that the path is correct and able to be reached. I don't know, a little bit of magic going on there as far as I'm concerned. But what this does is it loads in our custom main.js module that we've written all of our code in. Okay, so now with the save all, this should work. So another thing that you should know about Dojo is some items don't work properly in a non-protocol server environment. So if we just tried to open this up in Edge, it's not going to work correctly. We're going to have some kind of a Dojo error here. We go to developer tools. Let's look at our console. We're going to see an error here. Okay, so for whatever reason, let's just go. You can use Google Chrome or Firefox and it will work correctly. No, my example is not going to work for you because, like I said, I've got a VPN to my work environment. But if I were to take this file and put it out on a server, and I have tested this, Edge somehow works with it differently so that they get this and they end up with that Dojo error. But if I were to put this on a server and go to that path on the server, HTTP server name / index, whatever, it will work correctly. So it appears not to work in Edge, but it does just from the server environment. If you're trying to do it locally, you can still test it in Chrome and Firefox. Of course, I would recommend when you're done to also test it in your production environment. Okay, so basically that's really it. I just wanted to show how to do that. I want to give a shout out to somebody called named Rene Rubakova. He has a great video out. I may have butchered your name, Rene, but want to say thank you for your great video. But I will say that he is probably on the level of a genius, where I'm more capable of explaining things like I'm 5, because probably that's where my skills are at. But really, that was the kind of video I was looking for, something that made no assumptions as to understanding. So if you are needing something a little more advanced, and by little I mean a lot, because this guy he knows his stuff. I will put a link to his video in the descriptions, but it's a great video. I wouldn't have been able to make this video without it. Anyways, hopefully this helps you, and let me know if you have questions or recommendations, suggestions, and I'll talk to you later.